Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this ordinary meeting of Wingecarribee Shire Council on Wednesday, the 16th of March. Acknowledgement of country. Wingecarribee Shire Council acknowledge the Gundungurra and Tharawal people. Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this ordinary meeting of Wingecarribee Shire Council on Wednesday, the 16th of March. Acknowledgement of country. Wingecarribee Shire Council acknowledge the Gundungurra and Tharawal people. As the traditional custodians of this land, we now call Wingecarribee Shire. You might just have to bear with us for a minute, we're having obvious technical problems. For the record, I'll start again. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this ordinary meeting of Wingecarribee Shire Council on Wednesday, the 16th of March. Acknowledgement of country. Wingecarribee Shire Council acknowledge the Gundungurra and Tharawal people as traditional custodians of this land we now call Wingecarribee Shire. I pay my respects to elders, both past, present and emerging. I'd also like to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders present here or watching today. The prayer. Let us meet in this council chamber in the spirit of fellowship and goodwill to represent all members of the community and its cultural and religious diversity, to be honest and objective in all our deliberations, to respect the views of residents, the rights of people to express their opinion without fear or favour, and to make decisions for the common good of the community. There's also been an amendment to the model code of meeting practice in relation to a statement of ethical obligations, which is printed in the business paper, but I don't think from time to time it hurts just to remind ourselves of those obligations. As Interim Administrator, I commit to undertake the duties of the Office of Administrator in the best interest of the people of the Wingecarribee Shire Council area and to act faithfully and impartially in carrying out these functions, powers, authorities and discretions vested in me under the Local Government Act 1993 and any other act to the best of my ability and judgment. Obviously, there are no apologies. We'll deal with confirmation of minutes. The extraordinary meeting of council held on 16 February, they've been circulated and put on the council's website. I would move that the minutes of the ordinary meeting of council held on Wednesday, 16 February 2022 be adopted as a correct record of the proceedings of that meeting and declare that carried. General Manager, declarations of interest?
No declarations of interest, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I have, as usual, a minute, a bit longer than normal, but I'm dealing with a few issues in it, so please bear with me. And don't write notes. You'll get a copy, which you can write notes if you want to, but you'll get a copy at the end. The recent storms, which caused substantial flooding and damage to both private and public infrastructure in the Shire, show yet again that we are living in an environmentally changing world. In my visits to affected areas, there was one common theme from residents. We've lived through this before, but never this bad. In times of emergency, you can always count on volunteers from the SES and the RFS to be on the ground quickly, and they were. The police and fire and rescue also responded, and in my view, the coordination was first class. I would like to make mention of the council employees who worked very hard to ensure that our services were maintained and who, with the above mentioned, spent many hours addressing issues and call-outs from residents. Storm events like what has just occurred are coordinated by the SES, who, having regard to the forecast on Monday, 7 March, had already activated their incident management plan. Importantly, Council also played a key role in the plan, and I am told by the SES commander that he was very happy with the Council's response on the day and following. Together with Resilience New South Wales and Transport New South Wales, the Council has now moved to the recovery and clean-up stage in the area, and the area has been declared a natural disaster area. I would encourage residents who are experiencing issues to contact Council's recovery hotline or visit the community hub located at the Civic Centre. If you know someone who you think the Council could or should help, please let us know, as Council staff are also now door knocking. I'm even more determined to ensure that both the SES and RFS have facilities and resources needed to do their jobs properly. And this includes a new SES building at Moss Vale and water tanks across the Shire for the RFS. Yesterday, I joined a Teams meeting initiated by the Assistant Minister for Regional Development and Territories, the Hon Nola Marino MP, to specifically address the effect on the Southern Highlands when Council employees, representatives of business, together with the SES leadership, were given a very good hearing. Council was able to reinforce the effect of the storms on its already deteriorating road network, and the President, Business Southern Highlands, was able to advocate on behalf of businesses across the Highlands, in particular Robinson and Burrowing, who in effect are now isolated by the closure of the Illawarra Highway. It's devastating to hear the President of Wine NSW saying that the 45 wine growers across the region have in effect lost another vintage. Residents, business owners and primary producers are assured that the Council will continue to advocate with both state and federal governments on your behalf. On the negative side, I was extremely disappointed to be told that some of the Council staff who were responding to call-outs, in particular to potholes, were abused by a very small minority of people on the state of the Council roads. Let me be very clear. They are not at fault. They're just doing their jobs and they deserve better. A report on legacy issues relating to roads was presented to the last meeting, and I've already flagged that there will be significant additional resources in the 2022-23 budget allocated to potholes. We are listening and we're being open, honest and transparent about the problem, but it's not the fault of those who are out in storms addressing the emergency situations. In December 2021, IPART announced that the baseline rate peg for 2022-23 had been set at 0.7%, and Wingecarribee was allocated an additional 0.05% growth factor, bringing the total rate peg to 1.2%. In my view, the determination of IPART was unrealistic and would heavily impact on the Council's 10-year adopted plans, which provide for a 2% increase. The decision compares with the Consumer Price Index for 2021 of 3.5%. As the lowest rate peg in 2 decades, this would have an enormous impact on Council's ability to deliver works and services requested by the community and adopted in the delivery and operational plans. At a time when Council is working to drive community recovery from COVID and natural disasters and to improve local infrastructure such as roads, it is necessary to ensure that Council generates sufficient income to meet these needs. I have already flagged that in my view, that Council's priorities do not reflect the community's expectations, and this has been verified in community surveys. A reset in priorities is required, and I'm still waiting the finalisation of an independent report I requested comparing the valuation of council's assets, its fit for the future response, and the earlier special rate variation. On 7 March, IPART announced an additional round of special rate variation applications for councils that can demonstrate the need for a special rate variation to meet the obligations they set in their 22-23 and their integrated planning and reporting documents, specifically the long-term financial plan. If council applies and is successful for a special variation for the difference between the IPART announcement, that is 1.2%, and what has been planned within the long-term financial plan, that is 2%, this would generate additional income of approximately $425,000. Importantly, if the council was not to make such an application, the loss in revenue over the 10-year planning cycle would be $4.85 million. As expected, it is expected that IPART will provide detailed guidance on the application process and submission details by the end of this month, and applications will be accepted until 29 April. IPART intends to enable at least 3 weeks of community consultation prior to notifying councils of its decision no later than 21 June. Accordingly, I would recommend 1, council prepare and submit an application for a permanent additional special variation of 0.8% under section 5082 of the Local Government Act. 2, council notes that the 0.8% estimated additional income it will receive if the special variation is approved is approximately $425,000 and is already factored into the council's adopted long-term financial plan. 3, council confirms that the additional special rate is required to meet the obligations set out in council's adopted financial planning and reporting documents, and that if not supported will require a reduction in services. 4, council confirms that the impact on ratepayers has been considered as part of the budget provision for 2022-23 and future years, and considers the benefits to the community outweigh the impacts of additional income. I attended the LG New South Wales Water Management Conference in Narrabri between 9 and 11 February, together with the Director of Communities in Place, Jeff King, and Graham Mellor, Manager, Water and Sewer. There were a number of interesting presentations, site visits and opportunities for networking. Both relevant spokespersons for government and opposition parties addressed the conference. I was fortunate to spend time with the Resilience Commissioner, Shane Fitzsimmons, and Jim Bentley, CEO of the New South Wales water sector, and some of his team. The Commissioner is well aware of the problems that confront Wingecarribee Shire Council due to the lack of preparation at the civic level and the failures that followed the 2019-2020 Black Summer fires, and he indicated that he was prepared to visit the Southern Highlands to facilitate direct dialogue and undertake site visits. However, this may now be delayed by the flooding in northern New South Wales. We are moving to address the identified issues with emergency responses, and to this end, our local member, the Honourable Wendy Tuckerman, has arranged a meeting with the Minister for Emergency Services at Parliament House, Sydney, early next week. Mr. Bentley gave a wide-ranging presentation that addressed the question of smart meters for both mains and private connection, and has now facilitated for us officer meetings at the highest level of the state government. In addition, the provision of water to both the southern and northern villages has been talked about for too long, and it's now time for action. It's going to be costly, but to have any chance of being successful with grant applications, Council needs to have at least scoped the opportunities and documented and endorsed concept plans. I am firmly of the belief that the Council has the professional staff just to get on with this, in addition to the already heavy work schedule required for sewer upgrades that were reported to our last meeting. The availability of 200 state government funded upskilling job opportunities in the water and sewerage area was also of particular interest to me, and I'm encouraging the General Manager to follow up on this initiative and hopefully to provide opportunities for some of our own employees. Several items on today's business paper again highlight the complexity of the many issues that confront the Council, in particular of successive councils to address land planning issues strategically. I've repeatedly stated that residents need to control the future of the area, and it is apparent from residents and staff that this has just not been happening. The new suburb of Ashbourne is a prime example, and while it would have been better if the report of the Director of Communities and Place was available for this meeting, I agree that it is essential that what is reported is correct. I am told that how the whole matter was handled by both the state and the council is quite simply a quagmire, though it's just one of the many legacy planning issues that we're endeavouring to address. It's important when a new council is elected, they can hit the ground running. Openness and transparency in the community, consulting and importantly listening to residents are key pillars of the reset of the council. I've asked the General Manager to report to the May meeting of Council of opportunities to ensure that there is stakeholder opportunities for input in the many issues being addressed. Such report is to explore possible greater use of community members on the planning panel, if appropriate, as an advisory group to assist consultants, staff and myself in coming to good community-driven and supported outcomes. Together with the General Manager, I attended LG New South Wales Conference on 28 February and 1 March in Sydney. And there was representatives from most councils across the state in attendance. A number of politicians addressed the conference, including the Honourable Wendy Tuckerman MP, Minister for Local Government. Nearly 100 motions were dealt with at conference. Council submitted a motion to conference that local government New South Wales leads and resources advocacy for better outcomes in street lighting for member councils, in particular to assist small regional councils to share information more effectively and manage arrangements with the distributed network service providers. The motion was supported, but it was overridden by another motion proposed by Yass Valley, seeking LG New South Wales to commit to leading and resourcing an advocacy program on street lighting across the state, which is good news. So our motion got up. Just because a motion is successful at conference does not mean that it is actioned immediately or becomes law, and no doubt more information on this matter will come to Council through meetings of the Canberra Regional Organisation. I would move that the minute be noted and the recommendations contained therein be adopted and resolved accordingly. We now move to the printed reports on the business paper. 9.1, General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. May. I'll speak to this item. So this report provides the roadmap, our roadmap for moving forward to reset the organisation. The roadmap sets out the context in which Wingecarribee Shire Council is operating, some of the background information and findings of various reviews from 2019, the staff survey, the 2021 community satisfaction survey, and more recently, the reviews that were undertaken between March and the current date into the operations of council. The roadmap is an operational plan. It's about how the organisation can position itself in order to deliver on the community strategic plan and other strategies in place. And it's important to note we have a significant amount of work to do over the next few years, and it's important that we undertake that work in a staged approach. So set out within the roadmap are 3 horizons. The first horizon is between 2022 and 2025 and focused around creating a strong foundation back to basics, with 3 key directions around refocusing on the future in our community, reinvigorating our workplace, and rebuilding our organisation and our reputation. As noted in the report before you, whilst we've only recently finalised the roadmap, we've undertaken a number of initiatives that have either been completed or are currently underway that support those 3 directions. Just to highlight a few, and around refocusing on the future, in the last 7 months, we've adopted the local housing strategy. We've updated the forecast population figures with the assistance of Profile ID, and they'll be presenting at today's meeting on that. Also securing significant funding to assist with bushfire recovery efforts, and commissioning an integrated transport strategy. In terms of reinvigorating our workplace, we undertook phase 1 of the restructure in July last year, and we're currently working through phase 2 of the structural realignment. We've recently engaged our new Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Pav Kuzmanovsky, and also our new Executive Manager, People and Culture, Ms. Sally Samet. And both will be instrumental in taking us forward in terms of the directions and initiatives in our roadmap. In terms of rebuilding trust, we have adopted the corporate relations review late last year, and the process of implementing the recommendations from that. We've been implementing a strong ongoing consultation program in the last few weeks. Just to touch on a few, the Colo Vale place-based initiatives. We had a stall at the Colo Vale markets, the Robertson Place project, the Moss Vale bypass. We've commenced the exec listening tours, which commenced last night with the Bundanoon community, as well as a range of others. And probably most significantly, appointed the new place liaison officer. So whilst it's before you tonight for information, we haven't waited till it was finalised. We've been proactive in implementing a number of initiatives and directions contained in the roadmap. Thank you, Mr. May.
Firstly, if I could thank you for sharing this with me and for listening to me when I suggested that it should be shared with the community that you serve. I think it's a plus. I'll say publicly, as I've said to you, I think some of your dates are ambitious, but I wish you well. I think now that things have settled down in relation to staffing issues, I'm not saying that staff, you've got full positions, but the issues legacy issues you've been addressing, I think appear to be settling down, which, you know, I think it's a credit to you and to the staff that supports you how well they've been handled without much industrial action at the end of the day. But look, there's a couple of things I'd like to draw the community's attention to. It's no use the community or the council doing surveys and not listening. And, you know, on page 22 of your roadmap, you know, residents are asked why they live in the area. And obviously they say it's the natural environment because it's a beautiful place to live. There's no question about that. And, you know, a friendly community, country lifestyle, peaceful and quiet. But you then ask people, well, you didn't, this was done before you came, but it was released by one of your predecessors because the former council didn't release it. What the top priorities of the council should be, and clearly improving and maintaining roads, controlling development and infrastructure development. I know that your team are now working very hard to address those issues. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, the community strategic plan needs a realignment to address these issues. And I think it should be done in the next budget, and I look forward to it. There was one issue that did worry me in the report, and that was on page 76. I didn't realise that there had been a culture report done by the council in 2019 internally. I had never seen this before. You've told me that Mr. McMahon released it because he thought it should be released. No wonder there's problems in this place. And I encourage residents to read page 76 of the General Manager's pathway. It surely shows up problems, which thankfully this report addresses. So, again, congratulations to you and your team. I'm going to move a slight change to your recommendation because I'm of the view that your performance review panel should have input on this to see where you're up to. I've said publicly already that I think some of the stuff is ambitious. So don't think that I'm going to be attacking on some of that stuff, because I won't be. But I just think it would be good if, well, I'm going to move for 9.1 that one, council note our roadmap moving forward, but a new number 2, a further report be prepared by the General Manager to inform the General Manager's performance review in July 2022. And I declare that carried. And just so people are well aware, I just seem to think it would be very good if for the panel, which I'm seriously thinking about making the performance review a public document, but we'll worry about that later. But I think the community needs to know what has gone on and what is going on in this place. Next item, 9.2. General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. May. Online in COVID isolation is our Manager Strategic Land Use, Mr. Park. Can you introduce this item?
Yep. Look, thank you, General Manager, and hopefully you can hear me. I'm just getting bombarded with emails saying to stand back from the screen so they don't have to see my ugly mug. So I'm sitting as far back from the screen as possible, sorry. But this report provides both council and the community with an update on the proposed integrated transport strategy. So it includes an overview of the project and a high-level overview of the scope of works that forms part of the consultant's brief that will go into the tender in the coming weeks. I guess by way of background, so council are starting to set a really clear strategic framework for the Shire. So there's another report on the agenda tonight that the General Manager's mentioned about the updated housing and population forecast. Mr. May, as you'd be aware, we recently adopted the long-term housing strategy for the Shire. But it's now, I guess, really important for us to take a more strategic approach to the planning and delivery of transport infrastructure and services. So to ensure that the transport network, I guess, continues to meet our community's needs both now and into the future, and to ensure that we are using communities' money for the delivery of infrastructure in the best way possible. So the integrated transport strategy provides that important strategic framework, for transport planning across the Shire, and will guide infrastructure delivery over the coming 20 years. Look, I was planning on tabling the consultant's brief document at the meeting this afternoon, but unfortunately I'm stuck in isolation, but I'll arrange for that to be made available on council's website as part of the minutes following this meeting. And given the value of the project, the work will have to go through a formal tender process and will be publicly available through the tender portal as well.
In relation to you overlay what the brief is in this report, thankfully, but there will be ample opportunity for community input.
Yes, so definitely. There will be, as part of it, there'll be a development of a community engagement plan as part of the overall project. That will include broad community consultation as well as targeted consultation with some of the service providers as well, so including things like the bus operators, for example.
So you're ahead of my minute.
I'm going to say yes. I've yet to see your minute, but I'm going to say yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay, in relation to item 9.2, I would move the officer's recommendation on page 114 of the business paper and declare that carried. 9.3, General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. May. Back to the Manager, Land Use Strategic Planning, Mr. Park.
Thank you, General Manager. Look, I won't bore you with a similar introduction that I just have, but the report tries to provide both council and the community with an update on some key strategic and infrastructure planning projects that we believe are required to deliver a planning framework that meets the economic, housing, social and infrastructure needs of the community. There is a lot of good work that's happened over the last 6 months, and there's a lot of good work happening at the moment, but there is still a lot of really good work that needs to happen to get us to where we believe we need to be. We have been working closely with the state government through the planning delivery unit to try to fast track some of this work. The report outlines what we believe are some really critical projects for the future of the Shire on top of the work that we're already doing. So it looks at progressing the Southern Highlands Innovation Park master planning process, looking at a holistic review of employment lands throughout the Shire, town centre master plans for our 3 main towns, and then in terms of housing, trying to unlock some of our housing supply. So doing the really detailed work for infrastructure planning and the master planning, firstly for the Barrel South new living area, trying to review our medium density development controls to unlock some of the latent capacity within our existing towns and villages, but doing it in a way that keeps the character of the Southern Highlands, as well as trying to come up with a streamlined set of housing controls to make it easier for people lodging applications, as well as our guys assessing the applications, to try to fast track that assessment process. We are, as I said, working closely with the state government, but we think there's a need to continue to try to work with the state government to fast track this work so that we can get it in place as quickly as possible.
Look, those who thought nothing much would happen during administration were wrong. While I'm here, I want to make sure that the mistakes of the past aren't repeated, and you've only got to look at the SHIP, the industrial, the business, Southern Highlands Innovation Park, to see the carts before the horse. And again, there's problems, and you get applications, you don't know whether they're in the right place or whatever. And we just got to make sure that that doesn't happen again. This is an opportunity to at least start the process. I'm very confident that the council has the professional officers to get on with this. I've got a question in relation to on page 121. You've got council has been working with landowners within the new living area, and I think you're talking about what you said then, this area at Southern Barrel, but it's currently unfunded. Are there opportunities for the people who are going to benefit financially by upzonings in these areas, for them to meet these costs on the basis that, just because they're paying doesn't mean they get their way? Are there opportunities for that kind of thing?
Look, it's a good question, and yes, there are. So we've been working with the landowners for some time now to try to look at how we can better plan for infrastructure and a master planning process for that area. We have already looked at a couple of different models, one of which would include the landowners funding but council leading that process. it's been a bit of a challenge in getting landowner agreement to a process like that, but there are models available which allow that to occur. And what it does do is it makes sure that you're still looking at the site holistically and objectively, rather than individual landowners doing their own planning for their own site. It provides that holistic approach, which leads to a lot better outcomes.
I see Mr. King is also online. He's at home, COVID restricted too. If this had happened, you wouldn't be still working out how to address the Ashbourne problems, obviously. So look, I'm going to move us a few more points to this recommendation in relation to this matter. I'm happy with, on page 118, item 9.3 of the business paper, with items 1, 2 and 3, but it does not acknowledge the work that's already been done at the council. So at new number 4, note the significant work that council has already commissioned and funded, including the development of a community and recreation facility strategy, preparation of a master plan and vision for the Southern Highlands Innovation Park, an integrated transport strategy, the Bowral Town Centre Master Plan and the Robinson Place Plan, and another one. If council is successful in obtaining funding to deliver the South Bowral New Living Area Infrastructure Strategy and Master Plan, council investigate an appropriate model that allows the required studies to be led by council, but funded by landowners that will ultimately benefit from any rezoning. And I declare that carried. Excuse me. Item 9.4. I don't think this matter is being introduced, is it? It is, sorry.
Back to you, Manager Strategic Planning, Mr. Park.
Thank you, General Manager. So the report relates to a planning proposal to rezone land known as the Welby Garden Centre in Welby. The planning proposal has previously been supported by council and the local planning panel. What's come out of the public exhibition period is that the mechanism in terms of the rezoning can probably be better achieved through the use of Schedule 1 in council's LEP. So council, sort of in consultation with the landowner, has amended the planning proposal, and that's gone back through the the local planning panel, who support the revised mechanism to deliver ultimately the same outcome, but provides greater certainty to the local community about the end result. So it's largely an administrative process to adapt the planning proposal that's already been supported by council.
And importantly, it's been supported by the planning panel. In relation to item 9.4, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 124 of the business paper and declare that carried. Item 9.5, before that's introduced, could I just say thank you for addressing the question of where the panel does not agree with the council staff.
Okay, back to you, Mr. Park.
Thank you. So this report relates to a planning proposal to rezone land known as the Darrabee Lodge at Broughton Street in Mossvale. So the subject land is part of an identified new living area under the local housing strategy. But Mr. May, as you're acutely aware, the local housing strategy clearly sets out a process that we need to follow before we would consider rezoning the land. And in this case, there are a number of really key bodies of work and key infrastructure upgrades that are required prior to this rezoning proceeding. So while the landowner has lodged a planning proposal, the recommendation by staff to the panel was that we give in principle support to the proposal, but we reconsider it following the required work and the infrastructure upgrades. The panel agreed with that recommendation, but as you can see in the report, they thought it was important that the recommendation be more strongly worded, I guess, for want of a better word, to reinforce that this work needed to happen before they would consider rezoning on the subject land.
Thanks for that. In relation to item 9.5, I would move the officer's recommendation outlined on page 160 of the business paper and declare that carried. And in adopting that recommendation, I just draw people's attention to the fact that it's an amended officer's recommendation based on what the panel was saying. Item 9.6, General Manager.
Mr. Park, if you could introduce.
Okay, thank you, and to you, General Manager. So this report relates to another planning proposal that seeks to list a new heritage item on land at Elizabeth Street in Mossvale, as well as expand the Barrel Heritage Conservation Area. So by way of background, Council issued a number of interim heritage orders at the back end of last year. And what an interim heritage order does is it allows Council a period of time to undertake a detailed heritage investigation or assessment to determine whether those areas warrant a formal heritage listing. And in this case, that assessment has been completed, and the report ultimately recommends that the land in Elizabeth Street, Mossvale, proceed to heritage listing. And with the sites in Myrtle Street in Barrel, rather than an individual heritage listing on those three properties, that they be included in the broader Barrel Heritage Conservation Area. So the report recommends that we progress the planning proposal on that basis. The matter was reported to the local planning panel in April, and in March of this year, and the panel supported the staff's recommendation.
Thank you for that. In relation to item 9.6, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 226 of the business paper, 1, 2, 3, 4, and well, actually 1, 2, 3, let's call it 3A, 4 and 5. There's two number 3s. Or do you want to just renumber them totally? Renumber totally then. So make 3A, 4, then 5 and 6, if you can, please. Declare that carried. We now move to volume 2. We're now going to move suspension of standing orders so that we can hear the gentleman in relation to the ID work, and he can make a presentation to council. Accordingly, I would move, and in addition, there's a late item in relation to the flooding, which there hasn't been the 3 days notice given, but there's no decisions, just to inform the community where the council's up to, which I thought was important. I would move that standing orders be suspended in order to consider one supplementary item and one speaker. And I would declare that carried. Now, in accordance with clause 9.3b of the Code of Meeting Practice, I move as a matter of urgency that supplementary items be considered, natural disaster flooding, and that in accordance with clause 9.3 of the Code of Meeting Practice, I move that Mr. Glenn Capuano address the meeting in relation to item 10.1, informed decisions, Wingecarribee Shire Council briefing, and declare that carried. General Manager.
Yes, Mr. May. So before you is item 9.7, and that item deals with the natural disaster flooding.
My apologies.
Just gliding over there. And so that report sets out both the response during the flood event and council's actions in conjunction with emergency services, as well as sets out the activities of council post the response phase as we've entered into the recovery phase.
Thanks very much for that. Again, if I could congratulate all those involved in what happened last Monday, but there was a lot more than happened last Monday. There's been before and after. It's been quite an event, and to see the presentation that the officers gave to the Federal Minister yesterday, and to see some of the damage caused to infrastructure was very concerning. But the council staff will get on with it, and hopefully we'll get funding from state and federal government. I'm also concerned for those traders in Robinson who aren't getting the through traffic, and we're doing our best. Thankfully, a lot of people have insurance, are just getting on with it themselves, but there's people who need help, and the council is here to help to make sure no one falls through the cracks. And the work being done, I'm very, very happy with. In relation to this item, natural disaster flooding, on page, I'd move the recommendation on page 3 of the supplementary agenda. I'm going to read it out because I don't think everyone has seen it. That one, council formally accept the $1 million Commonwealth State Disaster Funding Arrangements. 2, council writes to the state and federal members to thank them for their support. 3, council acknowledge and thank all members, the emergency services and council staff who were involved in responding to the recent floods and now involved in post-flood recovery. 4, further report be provided to the May meeting regarding the recovery effort. This will enable a more comprehensive assessment to be carried out of private and public property. And 5, council consider any budget adjustments as part of the March 2022 quarterly budget review. And I declare that carried. We can now get to informed decisions.
Thank you, Mr. May. Mr. Park will introduce this item, and whilst Mr. Park's introducing the item, it was actually a cross-organisational project and had input from the whole organisation as part of this. Thank you, Mr. Park.
Thank you. So, Mr. May, this report relates to the updated housing, population and economic forecast that Council have recently received. So, Council recently commissioned demographic profiling company ID to prepare a suite of demographic and forecasting tools for the Shire. And that includes an economic profile and analysis tool, demographic and social profiles, and new population and housing forecasts. So these tools are now available on Council's website, and not just for Council, they're available for other service providers, for business and community groups, and they will allow Council and these groups to better understand how our community is changing. And importantly, it will allow Council and local service providers to better plan for the needs of the community, so better plan for housing, infrastructure, and the important services that we as Council provide to the community. The population forecasts predict that the population will increase to 65,000 people by 2041. And this is a fairly significant shift from the population forecasts that were done by the state government in 2019. And I don't want to steal Glenn's thunder, but I do just want to make the point that firstly, it's really important that we know how the population is growing so that we can better plan for the needs of the community. But secondly, we've tested these numbers against the recently adopted housing strategy, and we're really confident that we can still manage growth in accordance with the local housing strategy and do it in a way that maintains the characteristics of the Southern Highlands guidelines and is in keeping with the community's expectations. I just want to very quickly thank Glenn and his team at ID. They've done a really lot of good work on this project, as well as the council staff who put a lot of input into making sure that we're getting these numbers right. And Glenn, if you're there, feel free to jump in. So thanks.
Hello. Yeah, thanks, Michael. I'll just share my screen. Oh no, I can't share my screen at the moment. Can someone allow my screen sharing? Try that again. Yeah. No, I've got a slideshow presentation that I need to share.
Just one moment. We're just resolving that for you.
Thank you. Well, while we're waiting, thanks for inviting me along today. Yeah, my name's Glenn, and the company's ID. ID stands for Informed Decisions, and we're all about helping councils around Australia, about 250 of them at the moment, make evidence-based decisions about their community. We have a series of online information tools which are put together to assist councillors, council staff, and community groups to better understand the community. And these take you through a combination of census data and modelled information that we've got in the population forecast and the economic profile to look at both the past and future of your place. So you've actually got access to 4 of these information tools right now. So I've got a message. I can share my screen now, but I'll try that. Thank you. So let's try the slideshow here. And that's just a bit about us. Can people see that all right? Okay, I can see a couple of nods, so I'll continue on. So we have been working with Wingecarribee Shire Council for the past...
You just hold fire until... Okay, sorry.
Yep.
Fire away.
We're good? Okay. We've been working with you guys for the last 8 years, and you have, as Michael said, recently added both our economic profile and our population forecast. So I've got a bit on both of those, but I've got some broad information on population trends generally. There's a lot of things happening in population, particularly post-COVID-19, which seems to have affected everything, but the really interesting trends at a local level.
Excuse me, can I just ask you to slow down? You've got plenty, it's not a race. We've got plenty of time, so...
Have we? Okay, I was told 15 minutes, so...
well, if it takes longer, it takes longer.
Okay.
We've got to be able to hear you.
Thank you. So you do have access to 4 information tools, which are, you can see up there, they're on the right-hand side of the diagram. Community profile, which is 1991 through 2016 census data. At a local level, the social atlas, which allows you to see spatially mapped across the area how characteristics differ from place to place. And the population forecasts, which are based on a set of assumptions that we workshop with council, which we've just completed the first iteration of, and that goes out to 2041 for total population, age groups, and household types. You've also got our economic profile, which has recently been updated with the characteristics of the economy and the workforce, and enables you to model the effects of economic change. Those 4 tools work in together, and we are, particularly for the community profile and social atlas, we are waiting on 2021 census data, which happened last year. I've got a couple of slides at the end which suggest some of the things that we might see from that, but it has not been released as yet. We are certainly waiting for that, as everyone is, I think, at the moment. Where are we going? So what's happened nationally is Australia's population growth has slowed enormously since our borders were closed during COVID. We've got data to the end of June 2021, and it shows that we've actually got the lowest growth rate Australia-wide in over 100 years, which is quite unusual thing to say. But it comes on the end of a really strong period of population growth, which has covered most of our metropolitan and outer areas, with some rural areas still declining. The trend one of the trends that's impacting that is the national birth rate, which is very low. So 1.58 babies per female. We factor this into the population forecast, but we factor it in for a local level as well. And lowest birth rate on record ever recorded was in 2020 there. We are also dealing with an aging population, which is the baby boomers who were born in this time period here, moving through the population. So our forecasts will, in most areas, show a significant increase in population aged 70 plus. The baby boomers are moving through their 70s now, and then 80 plus over the next 10 to 15 years. The other part of population growth is overseas migration. Now, Wingecarribee gets a bit of this, not a lot, but that's now negative. So in 2021, that was a negative overseas migration. So we have to factor that in, and we've got the COVID impacts factored into that population forecast at the moment. But the state has gone from adding around 80,000 migrants to losing just a few, with particularly overseas students having left the area. The state, but not so much affecting Wingecarribee there. The trend that is really strong in New South Wales also is movement outwards. So the state overall, and most areas within the state, lose population in net terms to other states, particularly to Queensland. Queensland is gaining significant population numbers from other states. But as a related trend, which probably affects you more, which is that there's this strong movement out of Sydney into regional New South Wales. Now, Wingecarribee is regional New South Wales, although only just, but it's one of the key destinations for that movement, and particularly around the tree change sort of movement. That has increased during COVID. We know that's increased during COVID. It's reached nearly 30,000 people per annum. We just don't know at the moment where they're going. So we would expect that quite a lot of that movement would be into the Southern Highlands region. And you can expect that the next figures from the population update, which we're actually getting in about 2 weeks' time on the 29th of March, will show an increased population growth in Wingecarribee Shire because of that movement. We do have local government area figures up to 2020 only, but you can see the 5 years of growth from 2015 to 2020 that Wingecarribee sits in this significant corridor to the southwest of Sydney, which is showing very strong population growth. It's not the highest growth, which is sort of those fringe areas of Sydney and the centre of the city, but up to 2020, which only includes the first few months of the pandemic, that the growth into Wingecarribee and many surrounding areas is pretty strong. And indeed, it extends to the other side as well. Most of those coastal and somewhat inland areas are growing, while we have population declines further west. So the tools that you have online which help you understand this at a local level, and I'll be there in person during August to present a census update and some staff training on these tools when we get the census data from June. But for the moment, you've got up to 2016 census data, but you've got a time series going back to 1991, 38 demographic topics broken down, consistent geography for 11 towns and districts with full census data for each of those. The locality snapshots that cover individual localities, about 40 localities with one census period only, and a range of new topics that we've put online, like job seeker information, which is a recent one in there as well. And the atlas allowing you to map spatially to pinpoint the communities of interest and disadvantaged populations. So you're welcome to jump on those at any time, have a play around with it and understand the past information in there. But a lot of it is census based, and we are waiting for that 2021 census data from June to give us that update. Nevertheless, we do have some updates since then, and then our forecasts do give us a bit more information about where we see that future population going. So the current population estimate, and we get an update for 2021 on this on the 29th of March, which was then revised after the census data comes out in June, so it gets a bit messy this year. Population 51,760, increase over 4 years, right in line with the New South Wales average of 5.6% over that time frame. So it's around about 1.4% per annum population growth, but that part of that was a tick up in that growth, up to around 700 people in the 1 year into 2020. And the interesting thing is that as a shire, we factor this into the forecast as well, that the natural increase is negative, and that's due to an older population. That means you've got more deaths than births. The population would naturally decline in the absence of migration, but you don't have an absence of migration. Overseas migration is small, but will stop for a couple of years. We don't know how quickly that will ramp up again, but the big one for your shire is internal migration, migration from other parts of Australia, plus 522 for the year, and that's really only including the first few months of the pandemic, like the first lockdowns that we had in 2020. And that did start pushing people out into semi-rural locations, but that didn't really get going until 2021. So we would expect the next year's population growth to be a bit higher, and our forecasts do show that. Well, they show a bump and then a pull back a little bit, actually. So the age structure, which we go back to the last census for, reveals why you have a negative natural increase, and that is that the bulk of the population is aged, a lot of population aged over 65, which means that there's not so many births because you don't have that many people relatively of childbearing age. The median age of 47 is 9 years older than the state average, and the largest increases at the last census were 65 plus. What the next census may show is a change, perhaps with more working age population moving in, with the attraction of work from home, even part-time work from home in Wingecarribee and commute into Sydney on occasion, that sort of thing. So we won't know for sure until we get the 2021 census results, but we're certainly awaiting those. There's a few areas that are a little bit different to that. So, for instance, we break up into some different areas. Bundanoon, Exeter is one of those. A lot more people in their 60s and 70s in that area, which is generally the baby boomer population. Whereas a place like Robertson is a high socioeconomic area with a lot of families with teenage children, or we can call them mature families. So different areas of the Shire have substantially different outcomes in terms of population, and profile allows you to explore those. And then you can do the same areas on the population forecast and look at the future of those. Worth mentioning the household size information. 2/3 of all households have 2 people or less. And we've also got a great deal of information about migration and cultural diversity on the profile. Aboriginal population, there's a mapping of that as well, and then there's also overseas born population and the information about birthplaces and languages in there. There's not a huge amount of overseas migration into Wingecarribee Shire, but what you can see is up to the last census that was changing a bit with increases in places like China and India and the Philippines. We expect the census to show a bit of a mixture because our borders have been closed for the 18 months prior to census day, but so there wasn't much migration then, but you've got another 3.5 years in that time period when we had quite substantial migration into the country. But the other trend of migration, which is possibly of more interest, is and we certainly use this a lot in the population forecasts, is that Wingecarribee typically attracts people of family formation age groups, people in their 30s with school-age children, and also attracts retirees while losing 18 to 24-year-olds. And that is typical of regional Australia, but it's something that we know part of the apparent migration to regional Australia in the pandemic has actually been less young people leaving because there wasn't really anywhere to go, and as well as more people coming in. So we think that that has reduced, that loss of 18 to 24s has probably reduced over the last couple of years, but we don't have the data until that census comes out. So since the census, we do know, we do have estimates of the number of people that are moving in and where they're moving in from. We just don't know their age. We know that generally in the 2020 year that we've got access to, and just a couple of weeks we'll get the 2021 year, which I think should be really telling, is a continuation of a strong movement out of Sydney. You can see the Sydney local government areas on that map. That Wingecarribee Council attracts population from every area of Sydney, but particularly probably the higher socioeconomic areas that are looking for that tree change. So Wallandilly is the number one. That's just sort of an outward migration in a corridor, but then you've got Sutherland, Northern Beaches and Ku-ring-gai and even Inner West there featuring as movement in from Sydney. And these are the areas that are really attracted to that, that lifestyle, that movement outwards to a place where they may be able to work from home. There is nevertheless also losses, movement out to Goulburn, Canberra, and also some movement to coastal areas, including the Gold Coast there. The other aspect that we look at in terms of the population when we feed into the forecast is how people occupy housing. So housing is really important to the forecast. We look at what new dwellings are going in where, but we can also look at from the census how people occupy that housing. And you can see that Wingecarribee Shire has a very high rate of home ownership, both full home ownership and mortgages, relatively little social housing, some private rental, but it actually at the last census really bucked the trend in that there wasn't a significant increase in renting. Most areas in New South Wales had an increase in renting as housing affordability kicked in. Lack of housing affordability sort of kicked in, and I think that we will be very interested to see what the 21 census shows. But in Wingecarribee Shire, the increase was in full home ownership. So you've got relatively well-off people from Sydney buying in with full home ownership and either retiring or we think increasingly working population moving in. So, and the housing size that they're occupying in the area is relatively large, despite most of the population being in a 1 and 2 person household. So it's quite a mixture, quite a mismatch even of the housing size and the household size in there. You can see all of the increase, apart from the not stated category, was in that 4 and 5 plus bedrooms of the last census. So we do have another tool called Forecast ID, and there's another one which you don't have at the moment, which is the Housing Monitor, which goes into more detail about housing. But housing is a really important input into the population forecasts. We do have this online now. Now, I think the forecast password was due to be removed. I'll have to check whether it's been removed, but it's certainly, we've got that online, and it will be, if it hasn't been removed already, the password will be removed in the next few hours. I think it was supposed to be done by tonight. So the main thing about our forecasts is that they are politically independent. They're based on your input on the land supply, housing policies, and our assessment of things like who's moving in and out, that sort of stuff that I've talked about so far, about what types of households are attracted to live in certain areas. And it's expected to be reviewed and monitored against the current population annually, particularly when we get that 2021 census data point. We'll be able to see how the forecast is tracking, and hopefully, because it's fairly recently done, that it will be quite close, but the ABS does have a habit of adjusting population numbers post-census, so we'll may have to adjust to that. So what the forecast shows is a relatively steady growth, apart from this blip that we're getting in COVID, and it's a bit hard to see here, but I've got another chart that will show it. Average growth of 1.15% per annum out to 2041. And the new developments that are leading to that growth are mainly in the Moss Vale, Bowral and Mittagong areas, but the rural area is fairly steady, and that's just an issue of what land supply you've got available for that growth. There's some link in there, but I think I've got that shared at the moment. So when you get the slides, you can certainly go through and have a look at that forecast link. It's relatively minor overall effect on population for Wingecarribee because we think the overall lower growth is going to be offset by that movement into those tree change sort of areas, movement out particularly from Sydney. The age structure that we're expecting to see by 2041 still shows, however, substantial more aging. So as the baby boomers move through, the baby boomers are all into their 80s by 2041. The last baby boomers hit 80 at that point. So you're seeing that movement of the peak of population into these groups, and we're all living longer. We have longer life expectancy, so we expect a greater proportion of people to live to that age, which is great. But it does mean you've got relatively nearly a doubling of population aged 80 plus, and only sort of incremental increases in the younger groups. So the age groups still continue to move through into those older groups on a percentage basis at least, but certainly enough development that we are still seeing growth in all of those, and families with children, and even some in the young people who are not a major group, young adults, not a major group in Wingecarribee. We also forecast the components of that population change, and we do this at the local level, so you can see that in each town, each place individually, but overall for the Shire, you can see that natural increase continues to be negative and to go further negative over time. By 2041, we're talking about minus 250 per annum. That means just to keep up a stable population, you actually need to import people. And it's just due to that lower birth rate and the age of the population in there. You can see the migration in. We're expecting to see a COVID bump for the in-migration there in 2020/21, and then a drop back to more regular levels as some of those leave in 2022, and then coming back up as more land supply comes along over time, but still positive migration offsetting a negative natural increase over the longer term. So that's where the population forecasts are heading. The last thing which we have is a bit of information in the community profile and the economic profile on socioeconomic trends. The census is going to shed a lot more light on this as well. Wingecarribee is ranked fairly highly on the CEFA index, but there are pockets of disadvantage. CEFA index being the total level of disadvantage. That's the last thing released from the census. We won't get a new index of disadvantage from the census, which is very useful for understanding the area, but also applying for grants, which are often allocated on the basis of need, to understand the disadvantage in your area. But that's still a year away from the census release of that one. Generally, the incomes in Wingecarribee are clustered around the middle when you compare to the state, but we have had in the last census a bit of polarization. So incomes increased at the lower end and the upper end, and I think that's possibly the retirees and the younger well-off families moving in at the same time. You can also see the pockets of disadvantage on our social atlas. So if you map Wingecarribee, and sorry, it cuts off a few little bits on the edges of the Shire here, but consistently the lighter shades here are the more advantaged areas, and the darker shades are the more disadvantaged areas. So the pockets of disadvantage, and this is something we'll be watching closely when the census data comes out too, because this is still 2016 at this point. Moss Vale and parts of Mittagong, and this little area here, New Berrima, has got a relatively disadvantaged to the lower socioeconomic areas, but there are only pockets within those towns. Some parts of those towns are very highly advantaged. Also noticed that in the rural areas, the closer you get to Sydney, the more advantaged, and the further away, the more disadvantaged, but there's no extreme disadvantage in those areas at all. And that's reflected in our newest data set here, which is the job seeker. Job seeker you can now get every month, and we estimate this. We use this as a proxy for unemployment. It is not the unemployment rate, but we have that information on the community profile, which is updated every month. We've now got the January figures. The Omicron wave caused a bit of a peak in job seeker in December, but it's fallen again in a little bit in January there, after peaking, and only ever peaked around 7% in Wingecarribee Shire, which is very low on a national basis. The regional New South Wales average nearly peaked at 12%. That is 12% of 15 to 64-year-olds being on unemployment benefits. So that's very high, but not particularly high for Wingecarribee Shire, and you can see it's trended downwards since then. We'll be monitoring this monthly, and we calculated as a rate. You don't find it as a rate anywhere else. You can only just get the raw numbers off the government federal website. Finally, the other tool that you have is the economic profile, which is a lot of information which has just been released for 2020/21. Do recommend a detailed training session in this one. It's an economic modelling tool in there. If you change this industry, what are the flow-on effects to other sectors? Really powerful bit of economic modelling that you can do in there. Understand your tourism sector and understand 87 different industry sectors and how they're changing year on year. This will be updated for Census as well, but Census is not required to update this one because we have all of that annual data in there. The economy overall is valued at just on $3 billion and has shown relatively consistent growth apart from a small dip in 2019-20, which was the initial impact of COVID-19 affected most places. The largest industry is manufacturing in there, so it's quite a large industry. The largest industry is actually healthcare. Second largest is manufacturing. I'm not sure why that's come up there, but certainly it is pretty important manufacturing, but it's not quite the largest. Healthcare is the largest, which is consistent with an older population as well. And certainly is the largest employer in FTE terms. The number of jobs and residents is very close. So we actually look at who moves in and out of the area to work. There's about 23,000 local jobs for 26,000 employed residents. So some more people do leave the area to work, but on average, only a relatively small number do. Of course, more people leave and some people come in as well, and that sort of thing. Something we're going to have to be looking at very closely in the 2021 census as well, because the census was conducted in lockdown. We expect some confusion about what the workplace addresses were and whether that affects that data set. So we'll be watching that. Tourism is pretty important as well. Makes up 8.5% of all jobs, both direct and indirect. And the 2021 data is not available for this one yet, so that's 2019-20. Work destinations, as I said, this is probably a little bit out of date because of the census coming up, with which was conducted in lockdown. Probably the main thing that I found interesting there is after Wingecarribee itself, the second largest work destination was the city of Sydney. So there's quite a lot of people commuting to the city of Sydney, and that may lead to some of that movement out if you can work from home. And why wouldn't you really in a nice location like Wingecarribee Shire? The interesting things from the last census, residents working from home made up 9.1% of employed. That was extremely high at the time. But what you've actually got is a whole lot of people in professional services and administrative services who are already working from home. Now that's so much more of a thing. We expect work from home in the 2021 census is going to be a lot higher. It's going to be probably 30-40% even. But you've got to try and remove that long-term effect from the fact that we were in lockdown at the 2021 census day and people had to work from home. So unfortunately, it's going to be a little bit difficult to extricate that, but we'll be looking at that and whether we can extricate that to a long-term factor. But the other point is that it will affect your population growth. If people can work from home even part of the time, they're going to move to your shire, and they probably already have in many cases. So the census results, I won't go through all of these, but we've done some predictions about what we expect to see from the census and some of the sort of the key numbers at a national level. The main points are we get this data set in June of this year. We will be updating their client sites. We don't get any early access to the data, so we have to start updating our sites as soon as the ABS have their release, and we'll try to have a lot of the data updated within 1 month, with other things to follow from October, things like employment and internal migration from October. So that's coming out a bit later. And then that CEFA index, which is really important for understanding your socioeconomic characteristics in early 2023. We'll also use the census data, or particularly the population estimates that come out of census, to see if we need to adjust the population forecasts that have just been done. So they've been done with a base population of 2016, but we will see whether there's an adjustment needed to those based on what the ABS estimates show. Nevertheless, we think that they're probably not going to need a lot of update, but there may be some adjustment needed. We always need to match that census-based population. Also, a new topic for the 2021 census will be going on your community profile. We're very excited about this one. First time ever we've had a full-on health question in the census, and there'll be a lot of information about who's got long-term health conditions in the community, where those are more prevalent. So really helpful for understanding socioeconomic and health outcomes and how they're related. So finally, sorry, it's a bit of text on this slide, but hopefully you should have a copy of the slides, including the which I sent through a little while ago. So that actually includes an expanded version, some of the slides that I didn't get to in the time here, but that summary will be in there as well. But the main thing probably to remember is we do have these population forecasts currently showing around 500 to 600 people per annum growth. Expect an uptick for a couple of years and then a little bit of a fallback, but more and more people, probably more younger, not necessarily young, but families and people who can work from home, more likely to be moving out of Sydney. And even with lower national growth, that Wingecarribee is expected to continue to grow. So you do have access to those 4 tools: Profile Atlas, Forecast, and Economy ID. We have the other ones, the Housing Monitor there, and Community Views also available to add if you're interested in that. I don't know if this is being recorded, but you can certainly register for the content in our blog and newsletter at our site there, that URL, but you can also access all the sites from the landing page there, id.com.au/Wingecarribee. And by the way, you've also got access to the Canberra Region Joint Organisation, which I know now covers your area as well, which has got 11 local government areas, and you can compare between them and all of those characteristics in there. So make sure you're making use of that information, and any queries you can certainly approach me via the council staff there as well. So thank you for your time, and I'll stop sharing now.
Thanks very much for that. Your work seems to confirm what residents are telling me, that the Department of Planning's numbers, even their projections, are beaten already. Is you got any comment on that, or? Yeah,
I haven't checked recently, but I know most areas in regional New South Wales, the Department of Planning, which were also done pre-COVID, have been low. And we were when they came out, we were sort of scratching our head how they could come up with figures that low or even negative for some areas, which have been consistently growing. So one of the main attractions of our forecast really is having that political independence, so that it's not based. It's based on real world local conditions, and not based on what they call a tops down model, which is we're going to put a certain number of people into the state and then break that down. And they seem to have disproportionately put all of that growth into Sydney, which we know on the ground is not happening, and particularly since COVID, when you've got this movement outwards, which you can already see in the numbers.
Mm. You said you're coming to Wingecarribee in August.
Yeah.
So you will have populated your round one releases from the census by then?
All being well, yes.
Yeah.
So
Well, look,
census-
I'm going to ask the general manager while you're here if we can organise a community meeting, so the community can get the benefit of your attendance as well as the staff, so they can ask questions. So you'd be happy with that?
I'm happy with that. It may already be organised. Kath Brennan's organising that, so at council. So I know she was organising a few things, and I can't remember the exact date, but it was in August. So
yeah. Okay,
yeah,
I'm not operational, so
Yeah.
but I'm here for the residents, so I'll make sure that you can have a meeting. Okay, well, look, thank you very much. Has any of the staff present got any questions they want to ask? Or? Okay, well, in relation to item 10.1, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 309 of the business paper and declare that carried. There is no need to put anything about the meeting. No, okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we now move reinstatement of standing orders. I would move that standing orders be resumed and declare that carried. Item 10.2, planning and assessment, statement of expectations. General Manager.
Yes, thank you, Mr. May. To the Director, Communities and Place, Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. May. Council received a letter from the Secretary of the Department of Planning late last year advising of the making of a statement of expectations ordered by the Minister. The correspondence requested that all councils table the letter and the expectations of the Minister to a council meeting. We've taken the opportunity as part of the report to review past progress against these expectations and to suggest a range of potential actions to ensure council meets development assessment and strategic planning targets in the future. I think the report is fairly self-explanatory.
I've got a couple of questions. On page 313, you say the last data came out in 2019. I think I read in the Saturday papers, has there been new information put out just recently by the government?
No, what I was talking about in 2019 was that's the last issue of comparative data between councils in terms of assessment timeframes that's available on their website.
Yeah, and I don't think there is now 188 councils in the state. They seem to be reducing. So anyhow, okay, in relation to item 10.2, I would move the recommendation as outlined on page 311 of the business paper, 1 and 2, A, B, C, D and E, and declare that carried. Item 10.3, General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. May. I'll speak briefly to this item. So the delivery plan and operational plan progress update provides council and the community with an update on council's activities over the last 6 months, that is between the 1st of July and the 30th of December. Some key highlights, it is a comprehensive report, but some key highlights in that report include the establishment of a new Audit Risk and Improvement Committee with 4 independent and highly qualified individuals, and we've met a number of times over that 6-month period, and they've all provided valuable insight. Work's commenced on a strategy to move the organisation to a safety culture, and that in part is in response to a growing workers' compensation premium, and which is based on a claims history in the previous 3 years. We've also undertaken significant property-related reports in relation to leases, licences, land transfers and road closures. And in that 6-month period had over 16 reports to council to progress a number of items. Also made significant improvements within the customer service area, including the opening of the new customer service area. And we've been working on establishing the customer request management system, which is due to go live in April, although we were doing that work in that last 6-month period. In the last 6 months, we've also managed COVID round 2 and 3 with Delta and Omicron And despite the organisation, the staff being impacted, around about 30% of our staff have been impacted either through having COVID or being in isolation. We've managed with minimal service disruption in that period. Thank you, Mr. May.
Thank you. Look, I apologise again that I had to defer this matter at the last meeting, but it was a late item and I was just overwhelmed. I'm glad I read it before I got the last agenda. But it shows that, the organisation is still going, still working, and there's still good outcomes. I'm not going to ask people questions because I've been doing that myself as I'm reading it, just to get updates. But if residents, want to see what's going on, that's where to look at these quarterly and half-yearly reports. In accordance, accordingly, item 10.3, I would move the officer's recommendation outlined on page 323 of the business paper and declare that carried. The next one relates to the Code of Meeting Practice. Hasn't been called. I've now satisfied myself that what I put in the submissions to the public inquiry are addressed in the code, and I thank you for that, and I think it will lead to more open and transparent governance of this place. The only outstanding thing was the prayer, and that's going to be a matter for the community to make their mind up. Ever since I've been here, it's been an all faiths prayer, and I think that's important. If there is to be a prayer at all, it should be all faith. And I'm starting to meet with some groups now who wanting to talk to me, concerned about what I'm doing, but really just making sure that everybody in this community is respected. In relation to item 10.4, I would move the recommendation outlined on page 326 of the business paper and declare that carried. The next item is 10.5, General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. May. The Acting Director, Corporate Strategy and Resourcing, Mr. Crawford, will introduce that item.
Thank you, General Manager. The Office of Local Government has recently released an independent review into the current processes and procedures for dealing with allegations of council misconduct and invites submissions from councils and the public. The report presents a draft submission to the Office of Local Government on the key matters and questions raised in the review, and we seek authorisation to lodge this submission to the OLG for their consideration.
Well, if there's a council who should have advice for OLG in relation to council behaviour, it's Wingecarribee. And I personally think, and I've had no input into this, their operational issues, the staff have hit the nail on the head. More independence of council is required, more independence from council is required in dealing with these code of conduct issues. And whoever's written this report has addressed that question. Whether the government does it at the end of the day, I don't know. But I've been the administrator of a few councils now, and code of conduct issues are a continuing problem. It's like war games in some places between councillors, and it's just money would be better spent filling potholes. And people, have got to be respectful of each other. And let's hope that the new council, when it's elected here, does that. So anyhow, in relation to 10.5, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 367 of the business paper and declare it carried. The next item is the Ombudsman's report. It's been a long-running matter, General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. May. I'll ask the Acting Director, Corporate Strategy and Resourcing, Mr. Crawford, to introduce the item and also make a small correction to a date in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager. Mr. May, before I introduce the report, there is a mistake in the report, and I apologise for that. It states that the rescission was made on the Council's resolution on the 10th of March 2021. In actual fact, you rescinded that motion of Council on the 24th of March 2021, and that will be corrected in the minutes. At the conclusion of the New South Wales Ombudsman's investigation into development servicing charges in March 2021, Council adopted all 7 recommendations from the final report. Since that time, effort has been made into implementing all recommendations and providing a final report to the Ombudsman. The report outlines a response from the department, indicating satisfactory implementation of all the recommendations and the finalising of the matter.
Thank you. I could say more about this, but I'm not going to. I think the lessons have been learnt. In relation to item 10.6, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 397 of the business paper and declare that carried. Item 10.7, Berrimah Road Deviation Project, General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. May. The Coordinator Property Services, Ms. McCulloch, will introduce that item. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager. Mr. May, Council has been involved in complex and protracted negotiations with the owner of land at Berrimah that has been identified for acquisition as part of the Berrimah Road Deviation Project. As part of those negotiations, the landowner has agreed to allow Council access to the land to arrange for relocation of services and other ancillary works required to make the project shovel-ready. Negotiations are continuing with the landowner for acquisition by agreement. However, if agreement cannot be reached, approval of the Minister is required to issue a proposed acquisition notice, setting the timeframe for finalisation of the acquisition by compulsory process if required. A plan of acquisition defining the area required for acquisition has been registered. An updated resolution is now required, detailing the registered lots and deposited plan. Accordingly, this report is presented to obtain the required updated resolution of Council to move to compulsory acquisition if required.
This land relates to the so-called over the railway?
That's correct, Mr. May.
Thank you. I've got no questions about this. I think it's common sense. Item 10.7, I'd move the recommendation outlined on page 402 of the business paper 1, 2, 3 and 4 and declare that carried. 10, Berrimah Road, Moss Vale.
Thank you, Mr. May. Again to the Coordinator Property Services, Ms. McCulloch.
Thank you, General Manager. Mr. May, on 13 November 2013, Council resolved to include the property being Part 10 Berrimah Road, Moss Vale for future acquisition in the Section 94 Plan for Open Space, Recreation, Community and Cultural Facilities. The owner of that property has made contact with Council on several occasions requesting that Council proceed with acquisition of his identified land. Given the lengthy time that has elapsed since the Council resolution, the request of the landowner is considered reasonable. An updated valuation has been obtained and confirmation received that sufficient funds are held in the developer contributions reserve to proceed with the acquisition without further delay. This report is now presented to obtain the required resolution of Council to commence negotiations with the property owner for acquisition of the identified land.
As the report says, I met with the owner of this property. I just want to confirm, and any staff can correct me if I'm wrong, that I had no influence whatsoever in the preparation of this report. I just told the property owner it's not my job. You've got to deal with the council staff.
That's correct, Mr. May.
In relation to item 10.8 on page 4, I'd move the recommendation on page 408 and 9 of the business paper 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 and declare that carried. 10.9, General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. May. The Coordinator Economic Development, Jan Campbell, was introduced this item and Jan's joining us remotely. Thank you, Ms. Campbell.
Thank you, General Manager. This item relates to Council responding to a request from the Canberra Region Joint Organisation to provide feedback to a discussion paper in advance of the development of the ACT Government Capital Food and Fibre Strategy. Council will have the opportunity mid-year to provide further feedback to the draft strategy, which should be finalised by December 2022. This item is for information.
Yeah. Look, in relation to this matter, I have discussed it with the general manager. I had difficulty understanding what the council staff position was versus what the ACT government staff position was. But it's already been sent to them, and that you're only asking me to note the submission, so I'm happy to adopt that recommendation. But perhaps when time is available and I have time, someone can explain to me what the differences are. I generally support in it, but I found it difficult to understand what was their position, what the council staff position was. In relation to item 10.9 on page, I'd move the recommendation on page 414 of the business paper and declare it carried. Next item is alcohol-free zone.
Thank you, Mr. May. Again, the Coordinator Economic Development, Ms. Campbell, will introduce this item and perhaps cover the reasons why we're requesting this. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager. Council is hosting an outdoor event in Corbett Plaza on Saturday, the 19th of March. This is one of 3 events funded by the New South Wales Government Festival of Place Summer Night program, for which Council received funding. In Corbett Plaza, existing cafes which are normally closed will reopen for twilight trading on that evening, and a jazz trio is performing. The Plaza is an alcohol-free zone, and Council is asked to consider suspending the alcohol-free zone declaration at this location for one evening. Police are supportive, neighbouring businesses have been notified, and the signs would be covered for the duration of the event.
What a great idea. In relation to item 10.10, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 440 of the business paper and declare it carried. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Look, Renwick Community Centre, I see there's no one to call this. I've obviously spent a lot of time down at Renwick on this issue. Everyone wants a little coffee shop in Renwick. And it was one of the first meetings I went when I arrived here, and I was surprised how many people drink coffee in Renwick by the number of who turned up. I just want to make sure, I've read it, and I'm pretty sure I'm answering my own question, but there is nothing in this plan of management that will stop the creation of a commercially operated coffee cafe in the community centre.
Mr. May, I'll ask the Director Service Delivery to respond to that.
Thank you, General Manager. Mr. May, the draft plan does not prohibit a cafe. The table 3 on page 16 lists the general types of uses and forms of development associated with these uses. Cafe or restaurant, including outdoor seating, is listed. A cafe is a development that will be permitted under the plan of management and under the applicable zoning with consent.
Look, thanks for that. And this happened before you arrived, but I caused the problem in that originally the staff wanted to declare the land as operational land, and I don't agree with that in relation to public property. I think it should be community land. So I created the problem. You're helping me get it out, fixed up. Thank you very much. In relation to item 10.11, I would move the recommendation as outlined on page 443 of the business paper, 1, 2, and 3, and declare that carried. 10.12, tulip time. General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. May. I'll ask the Acting Director, Corporate Strategy and Resourcing, Mr. Crawford, to introduce this item.
Thank you, General Manager. After a successful hybrid tulip time event in 2021 with a digital focus due to COVID-19 restrictions, planning for the 2022 event is underway, with a key step being the choice of charity partner. Event charity partners benefit from increased awareness and significant fundraising opportunities. After extensively promoting an expression of interest process, it's unfortunate that only one application was received. However, this is understandable given the uncertainty around the future of COVID restrictions and the impacts on volunteers. It is pleasing that the submission received from Harrison Memorial Retirement Village met all criteria accordingly, and it's recommended that they are approved to be the 2022 charity partner.
Good result. In relation to item 10.12, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 491 of the business paper and declare it carried. 10.13 Mossvale bypass.
Thank you, Mr. May. I'll ask the Director Service Delivery and Special Projects, Ms. Targa, to introduce this item, and I won't steal her thunder, but we've had some very positive news this afternoon.
Thank you, General Manager, and through you, Mr. May. Confirmation has been received from Transport for New South Wales that an additional 1.1 million in funding will be provided to ensure that the design for all stages of the Mossville bypass can be undertaken at the same time. It has been identified that there are significant benefits in proceeding with the detailed design and documentation of stages 2 and 3 at the same time as that for stage 1. These benefits are both in terms of community impacts and cost and time efficiency. Being able to undertake all 3 stages at the same time is a great outcome for our community. The recommendation of this report ensures that MU Group can be engaged to concurrently undertake the 3 design stages.
Well, that is very good news. Our trip down to Parliament House was worth it. I just think it was stupidity to do have stage 1 in the middle of stages 2 and 3. Those who know the project will understand what I'm saying. The residents were right. With the assistance of the government and our local member, common sense prevails. So that's fabulous news. Do we add a number 4? For council recognise the assistance of the member for Goulburn and the Minister for Regional Roads in achieving a community-based outcome. That's fair enough. Happy with that? Yeah, just a capital R for roads, and that's good, thanks. Declare that carried. Now, I better do it properly. In relation to item 10.13, I would move the officer's recommendation 1, 2 and 3 and the 4 as noted on the screen and declare that carried. And if I could also ask General Manager if you convey to the council staff who have been in consultations with the residents down there. We're not going to make everybody happy. I appreciate that. But now there won't be rat runs. Item 10.14, the Mossvale War Memorial Aquatic Centre. General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. May. To the Director, Service Delivery and Projects, Ms. Targa.
Thank you, General Manager. Through you, Mr. May. The purpose of this report is to facilitate the inclusion of a multi-purpose space and changing places facility expansion in the Mossvale War Memorial Aquatic Centre. Council's contract manager of Mossvale War Memorial Aquatic Centre, Bluefit, submitted a DA-approved grant to the Regional Sports Facilities Fund on the 26th of February 2021. Bluefit received official confirmation on the 26th of June 2021 that they were a successful recipient of the Regional Sports Facility Fund with grant funding of $590,000 allocated. The success of the grant has provided an opportunity to fund the provision of a multi-purpose space changing places facility and a health co-located service. This is an important project that will provide residents of the Wingecarribee Shire and the surrounding region with improved access to facilities and services for people with a profound disability, and increase in participation for targeted populations, including youths and females, through provision of multi-purpose space training facility. Due to challenging COVID restrictions and increased demand in the construction industry, tendered costs for the project have exceeded the original budget and grant of $590,000 by $265,000. Bluefit have indicated that following 2 years of COVID challenges, their company is not in a financial position to fund this gap and have reached out to see if Wingecarribee Council would be able to provide the funds required to allow the project to proceed. The expansion of the Mossville Aquatic Centre will provide greater capacity to attract a larger membership, increase income, and reduce the cost associated with the operation of the facility. It is proposed to commit $265,000 to assist with the shortfall in funding, with funding being available from the Land Rental Charge Reserve and the Mossville Aquatic Centre Reserve.
This is probably a question that I would normally ask the CFO, but haven't been here long enough to. This doesn't, using the money from the reserve won't cut across your discussions with the audit committee in relation to reserves?
Through Mr. May to the Deputy CFO.
Only reason why I asked the other week where that was up to, and it's in discussion with the audit committee, because we've, just so that residents understand, instead of having these balanced financial reports all the time, the council's got to fess up and get $5 million in there as rainy day money. And I think you're negotiating still with the audit committee.
I went to the audit committee on the 10th, I think it was, with a draft reserves policy, and they were quite happy with what we presented. So
this won't affect that at all?
No, there's enough uncommitted funds in the land rental reserve to fund this project, and also establish the unrestricted cash balance of $5 million.
Great news. Thank you very much. I should have asked you earlier, I apologise. In relation to item 10.14, I would move the officer's recommendation outlined on page 507 of the business paper and declare it carried. Station Street. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. May. To the Director Service Delivery and Special Projects, Ms. Targa. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager. Through you, Mr. May, sorry. The tender for the Station Street water main renewal is the first step to commence work in the Station Street renewal project. The new water main installation facilitates the old concrete asbestos water main that's located in the road to be removed as part of the rehabilitation works. The report presents the evaluation of the tenders received following the request for tender and recommends the engagement of a contractor for the works.
Look, I'm very happy with this. In relation to the evaluation panel, with respect, there's too many engineers and no one from governance and no independent person. If we can get a report soon up about how we can address this question. I'm not saying there's anything wrong, it's just perceptions. I have every confidence in the staff, but I'd be happier if there had been someone from governance, or even happier if there was an independent person. And we could get a small panel. I'm not suggesting we spend a fortune on this, but I'm sure there are people within this community who would be more than happy for a small fee to come and assist, particularly now they're not being dealt with in closed council. In relation to item 10.5, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 548 of the business paper, 1, 2 and 3, and declare that carried. Sporting light upgrades. General Manager, there's no one introduced in this one. Well, I thought this was great news. A local company has won a tender from the council, which is really, really good news. And to address my concerns about the panels, I see you had an independent electrical person on it, which was good news. But more importantly, it'll certainly improve the lighting on the netball courts and at Lisby Park. Accordingly, in relation to item 10.16, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 553 of the business paper, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, and declare that carried. Investment report, it's not being introduced. I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 558 of the business paper and declare that carried. 10.18 traffic committee minutes. I have a question in relation to this one. It doesn't in the minutes note whether any residents attended. I'm a little bit perplexed as to why it was a Zoom meeting too, but I think I know the answer to that. But did any residents attend the meeting, do we know?
To the director, Ms. Targa.
Thank you, General Manager. The meeting was actually held in person at the Council Administration Building, but some members of the committee accessed the meeting through Zoom due to their distance from the Council building. No residents did attend the meeting.
In relation to item 5.4, Bowman Road, were the residents who have been having problems getting access to their properties advised of the meeting?
I don't believe that residents were invited to the meeting. The normal protocol is if an item has been instigated by residents, they are invited to the meeting. But if it's something that is on our normal running order or normal process of business, they are not invited. But if they instigate an item, they would be notified and invited.
I'm happy to be corrected, but I think this was initiated by some residents who live down further. But look, if we can I just think it's very important that residents have an opportunity, particularly with the traffic committee, so they better understand how these decisions are made if they can come. Having said that, I'm happy with the report. Accordingly, in relation to item 10.18, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 565 of the business paper, 1 and 2, and declare that carried. Audit Risk and Improvement Committee minutes not being introduced. I think it's all pretty self-explanatory. You got them working, and they got you working. In relation to item 10.19, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 578 of the business paper and declare that carried. Item 10.12, the Canberra Region Joint Organisation. Obviously, I attended this. This is for the information of residents. We're putting the minutes up. In relation to item 10.20, I would move the officer's recommendation as outlined on page 594 of the business paper 1, 2 and 3 and declare that carried. That brings us to the conclusion of probably the longest meeting we've had. General Manager, have you got anything else? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. May. Just to formally introduce our new Executive Manager, People and Culture. So Miss Sally Samet commenced with us about 36 hours ago, Monday. And Sally comes to us from a very long career in the New South Wales Health Service, and we're very happy to have you on board. And also to welcome our new Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Pav Kuzmanovsky. And Pav has had a very long career in local government at various councils, as well as some time in the private sector. I'd also like to thank Damien Jenkins, our Deputy CFO, for acting in the role, and appreciate his work, and particularly with the ARIC in that time, and appreciated his professionalism in that forum. So thank you.
Well, on behalf of residents, I've met you, so congratulations on your appointment. I hope you enjoy your time at Wingecarribee. And there's a lot to be done, but I'm sure if you've been appointed, you're up to it. Having said that, I declare the meeting closed.